Take away every screen in your house tonight, every light, every device, every reason to stay awake. What's left? A dark room and your own mind, which for most people today is close to unbearable. Now go back before any of that existed. Before houses, before candles, before language had fully formed. There was still one thing keeping the dark from swallowing people whole, a small, contained, deliberately fed flame. And that flame did something to the human brain that nothing else on Earth had done before. Here's the question nobody asks about fire. Everyone knows it kept us warm. Everyone knows it kept predators back. Almost nobody asks what it did to consciousness itself, because the answer sounds too strange to take seriously. Stick around because it's stranger than it sounds, and it's backed by more evidence than you'd expect. Start with the obvious use: heat, protection, cooked food. That story gets told constantly, and it's true, but it's incomplete in a specific way. It treats fire like a tool, something used and then set aside. Real fire, ancient fire, wasn't set aside. It burned every single night, for hundreds of thousands of years, which means it wasn't just solving physical problems. It was reshaping behavior on a timescale long enough to reshape biology. So what actually happened night after night in front of that flame? Before controlled fire, the evidence suggests our ancestors slept the way most primates still do. Fragmented, cautious, frequently interrupted, often in trees, because the ground at night belonged to whatever could kill you fastest. Deep sleep in that environment wasn't peaceful, it was reckless. A brain that switched off too completely was a brain that might not wake up. Fire changed the physics of nighttime danger. A burning perimeter meant most predators kept their distance. For the first time in an evolutionary story that stretches back millions of years, it became survivable to lie flat on open ground and actually let go. Not just close your eyes, actually descend into something deeper. That shift alone is enormous. But here's the part that gets stranger the longer you sit with it. Once deep, undisturbed sleep became possible, something inside that sleep changed too. Modern humans spend a disproportionate amount of their sleep cycle in a stage where the brain is almost as active as when awake, but the body is essentially paralyzed. Vivid, immersive, emotionally overwhelming experiences happen in that state, experiences the sleeper often can't distinguish from reality while they're happening. Some researchers studying sleep evolution have proposed that this stage expanded specifically because fire made deep sleep safe enough for the brain to spend real time there. Not a coincidence sitting next to a coincidence, a direct consequence of one invention, small and orange and fragile, changing what the mind was allowed to do once the body finally felt safe enough to stop watching the tree line.
Which means every single night, around that fire, an entire species began having a second kind of experience. Not the waking world, not full unconsciousness either. Something in between, something intensely real feeling, happening behind closed eyes, completely inaccessible to the people sitting fully awake just a few feet away. Now put those two groups next to each other, because this is where it gets interesting. Some people awake, tending the fire, watching the dark, others asleep nearby, deep in an internal experience the waking people couldn't see or share. When the sleepers woke, what do you think they did? They talked about it, not because anyone told them to, because something that vivid demands to be spoken out loud. Here's a detail that rarely makes it into casual retellings of human evolution. Anthropologists studying oral cultures across radically different continents have noted the same pattern independently. Dream sharing isn't an occasional habit. In many of these cultures, it's a near-daily ritual, often happening at the exact same fire where the sleep occurred, often first thing after waking, structured almost like a report from somewhere else. That's worth sitting with. A daily, repeated, structured practice of describing an internal experience to a group, using language, using memory, using enough narrative structure that someone else could follow it. Before you assume that sounds like a small thing, consider what it actually requires. Sequencing events, choosing words for feelings that don't have obvious physical reference, holding an audience's attention with something that happened entirely inside your own skull. That is an enormous cognitive load, practiced constantly, for free, every single morning, around a fire that made the whole cycle possible in the first place. Some researchers studying the origins of storytelling and language now argue that dream narration wasn't a side effect of language. It may have been one of the environments language got shaped inside. Not the only pressure, certainly not the whole story, but a real one, repeated nightly for hundreds of thousands of years, in the one setting stable enough to make that kind of repetition possible. There's a second layer sitting right underneath this one, and it's the part most people miss entirely. A fire wasn't just where people slept and dreamed, it was where waking altered states happened too, from smoke, from prolonged staring into flame, from exhaustion, from the simple hypnotic effect of watching something flicker for hours with nothing else demanding attention. Which means the fire circle wasn't offering one kind of altered experience. It was offering several, stacked on top of each other, night after night, and every one of them got processed by the exact same group, in the exact same place, using the exact same emerging tool, words. Waking visions got described the next morning alongside dream visions. The line between the two, sharp and obvious to us now, may not have felt sharp at all to people experiencing both back to back at the same location, without a framework yet built to separate them. Something happened. It felt significant. It got put into words, and the group listened. That process, repeated enough times, does something specific to a group of people. It builds a shared internal vocabulary for things nobody can point to or touch. Fear given a name. A hard winter turned into a story with a shape. A dead relative appearing in a dream and being spoken about the next morning as though the conversation had actually continued. None of that requires belief in anything specific. It only requires a fire that made deep sleep and shared mornings possible in the first place, plus enough repeated practice that language learned to carry weight it had never carried before. This is the part that should genuinely stop you. We tend to imagine early humans developing language mainly to coordinate hunts, share warnings, pass down practical knowledge. All true, almost certainly, but sitting right alongside the practical uses every single morning was something far less practical and possibly just as important: a structured, repeated, emotionally loaded practice of turning an invisible internal experience into something spoken, shared, and remembered by other people. Fire didn't just make sleep safe, it made a very specific kind of sleep possible, then handed that sleep an audience every morning for as long as the fire kept burning. So next time you fall asleep with a screen still glowing somewhere in the room, here's what's actually missing. Not silence, not darkness. An audience, a circle of people who expect to hear, tomorrow morning, whatever happened to you somewhere they couldn't follow. That exchange ran nightly for most of human history. It stopped being ordinary so recently that the instinct underneath it hasn't caught up yet. The fire's gone. The urge to tell someone what happened in the dark never left.